Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is sponsored by the American Brain Coalition, also known as ABC, and the American Academy of Addiction Psychiatry, also known as AAAP. My name is Justine Andonian, and I'm from AAAP, and we'll be helping to moderate today's discussion along with Katie Sale, ABC's Executive Director. Before I pass the presentation over to Katie to introduce our featured presenters, Dr. Gaia Dowling and Kevin Gray, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items with you. So first on our list, today's webinar, it will be recorded and then archived to ABC's website within 2 weeks of today's live discussion. A link to the archive will be provided to all participants once the archive has been posted, so you are aware that it is available. So next on our list, all participants are muted upon entering into today's discussion, just to help minimize any background noise. So if you would like to submit a question to Dr. Gray or Dr. Dowling, or if you have any questions regarding audio, you can type those into the question or chat box that's located in your control panel. For questions for the presenters, we'll be discussing those at the end of today's webinar, which is through our Q&A session. So I just wanted to make a note, if you're experiencing any audio issues or if you're calling in using your computer's and speakers, I would recommend calling in with a landline. And you can switch from your mic and speakers to your telephone by going into your control panel. There's an audio section. If you click telephone, your call-in number and access code will appear in order to do that. And so last on the list, if you'd like to follow along with the presentation slides, you can access them in your control panel under the section noted handouts. And if you just click on those, they'll open up and you can follow along that way also. So this concludes today's housekeeping items. I'd now like to turn it over to Katie Sale to begin our webinar. Katie?
Thank you, Justina. Welcome to today's webinar on the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, referred to as ABCD. I am Katie Sale, Executive Director of the American Brain Coalition, who is hosting the webinar as a series of educational opportunities for the ABC membership, along with the American Academy of Addiction Psychiatry, an active ABC member, as Justina mentioned. We are excited to have two distinguished experts to speak with us and answer any questions that you might have. Gaia Dowling, PhD, is the director of the ABCD project at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Dr. Dowling has spent the last 16 years at multiple agencies within NIH, starting off at the National Institute of Mental Health, moving to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, becoming the Chief of Science Policy Branch of NIDA before moving over to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute as the Deputy Director of Science Policy, Engagement, Education, and Communications. Dr. Dowling received her PhD in neurobiology from the University of California, Davis, and was a postdoctoral and staff research fellow at the Parkinson's Institute. Dr. Dowling will provide an overview of the ABCD project before turning it over to Kevin Gray, MD, Professor and Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the Medical University of South Carolina. Gray received his Bachelor of Science degree from Clemson University and his medical degree from MUSC, where he went on to complete his residency in adult and child and adolescent psychiatry. Dr. Gray conducts research involving substance use disorders in adolescents and adults. Dr. Gray is a current member of the American Academy of Addiction Psychiatry Board of Directors Research Committee Chair. The Research Committee examines how recent research advances inform the contemporary practice of addiction psychiatry. Dr. Gray will provide a brief perspective on the importance of such a study for the patient advocacy community. We will then open it up to a Q&A with Dr. Dowling and Dr. Gray. I'd now like to turn it over to Dr. Dowling.
Great, thank you, Katie and Justina, and I'd also like to thank ABC and AAAP for inviting me to come and speak about ABCD. A lot of acronyms there, but I'm having some trouble advancing my slides. Justina?
Dr. Dowling, do you want to try and hit your escape button? on your computer. It may have potentially frozen.
Okay, let's try it again.
Open it again.
Can I do it? There we go. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So ABCD is going to be a longitudinal study of about 10,000 children starting at ages 9 and 10 and followed through early adulthood to assess numerous factors that influence individual brain trajectories as well as many different kinds of functional outcomes. Why are we doing this study? Well, we all know that adolescence is a time of incredible physical, emotional, and intellectual growth. And brain imaging research over the past decade or so has really showed how much continued brain development is occurring during this time period. However, there's a lot we don't know about how the many different experiences that kids go through during adolescence affect brain, social, emotional, and academic development. We're looking at things like sports and music, video games, sleep, exposure to substances of abuse. How do all of these experiences affect adolescent development? And while there's been a lot of research looking at different aspects of adolescent development, there haven't been studies with the kind of longitudinal design that I'll be speaking about that have been able to get a comprehensive picture of all of these factors and how they influence these different trajectories of time. So this is a collaboration between 8 institutes, centers, and offices at the NIH that have come together because they all have a common interest in really understanding adolescent development. The main research objectives that these institutes came together to support this study primarily have to do with how do we characterize these individual developmental trajectories. So like I said, brain development, cognitive development, and all of the factors that influence them. We hope that this study will provide us with national standards of normal brain development in youth. So we know that you take your child to the pediatrician and there are growth curves that keep track of height and weight over time, but we don't have anything like that for brain development. So we think that a study of this magnitude could be able to provide those kinds of standards. We want to understand better the role of genetics and environmental factors in development, and one of the components of this study will be that we are going to be including 800 twin pairs that will help us dive deep into some of these questions. As I mentioned, we're going to look at a number of different factors, and I'll get into this more in a few minutes, but things like physical activity and sleep, screen time, injuries, how do they affect brain development and other outcomes? Some fundamental questions about mental disorders that remain unanswered, including factors that affect the onset and progression, as well as their relationship to substance use. Really require a study that looks at kids prior to the onset of these disorders and prior to the onset of substance use and follows them through the period of greatest risk. And again, with respect to substance use, we want to understand how exposure to different substances alone and in combination, as well as taken in different ways, particularly as new types of substances and new ways of taking substances are emerging. How do they affect developmental outcomes? So I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea about how the consortium was established before going into more detail on the protocol itself. So when we set out to build this consortium, we really felt that we needed to get input from a vast array of researchers in the field who have expertise in large-scale longitudinal studies, particularly in adolescents. So we had some expert panel workshops, we did a request for information, we had some symposia to really get input on the many different domains that were going to be included so that we could put together a framework when we released the funding opportunity announcement for this type of study. We decided to do this as a cooperative agreement so that the scientific community would apply for the consortium application, and they would put forth how they felt in their expertise were the best ways to answer these questions and build this cohort. But we also wanted the NIH to have a role in the consortium moving forward. This was very well received by the scientific community, and in September of last year, we awarded 13 awards, one for a coordinating center, one for a data analysis and informatics center, and 11 research grants that comprise 19 research sites across the country. So here's a map that kind of shows who was funded for this consortium. You can see that the Coordinating Center and the Data Analysis and Informatics Center are located at UC San Diego, and then there are research sites around the country. So now let me go into a little bit more detail about how we're planning on conducting this study. As I mentioned, we are looking to recruit 9 to 10-year-olds, 10,000 9 to 10-year-olds from across the country. And we believe that the best way to do this, to be able to get a sample that is really balanced in terms of demographics, is to work with the school system. Most of these kids are enrolled in school, and this will allow us to really monitor the demographics of the populations as we're actively recruiting. The schools will then send information packets that we provide them with information about the study to the families of all the 8, 9, and 10-year-olds in their school. If families are interested, they can respond to the local site either from a website or from a response card or calling them, and then the sites will contact the parents and do the screening for the study. And one thing I'd like to emphasize is that we are really aiming to be very inclusive in this study. So there are some basic inclusion and exclusion criteria, but our goal is to have a very large sample of the adolescent population. So the next couple of slides show how we're planning on balancing the demographics. We did an analysis of public and private schools, 3rd and 4th graders in the catchment areas located around each of our research sites. And at the top you can see the U.S. population divided by sex, urbanicity, and we're using free and reduced price lunch as an indicator of socioeconomic status to begin. And then at the bottom you can see the ABCD catchment areas. So the catchment areas for the ABCD sites represent about 2 million kids at this age range, which is about 24% of the U.S. total population of kids that age. And you can see that our sex breakdown matches the U.S. population. Our urbanicity is a little bit more urban than the U.S. population, and our SES is a little bit off from the U.S. population, so those targets will be adjusted in terms of the local recruitment targets for each site so that we can raise our rural population to about 10% and raise our free and reduced price lunch population to about 50%. And then if we look at race and ethnicity, on the left here you'll see the U.S. population, and on the right you'll see the ABCD catchment area. And again, we're relatively well balanced, but we are planning to adjust our recruitment targets to increase the percentage of Black participants and reduce the percentage of Asian participants. To do this, we have partnered with a number of different organizations. At this stage of the game, our greatest emphasis has been on education organizations, since we are going to be working through the school systems, but we are also interested in partnering with health organizations, and you can see some of those listed here as well, in terms of raising the profile of the study to those communities to help engage parents and schools in participation. And to date, this has been very successful. We have, we're just at the beginning stages of approaching school districts, but we have a number of school districts already on board to allow, help us with the recruitment process. As I mentioned, in addition to recruiting through the schools, we are going to have a twin cohort as part of the study. The twins are not going to be recruited through the school systems. I should rephrase that. If twins may be recruited through the school system, but there will be a targeted effort to recruit twins using birth registries at 4 of the sites. These are at Colorado, Minnesota, Missouri, and Virginia, where they will be recruiting about 800 twin pairs, both monozygotic and dizygotic twins. And you see here the race breakdown. So here what we're going to try and do to balance the race is to match the U.S. total birth population, not the twin birth population. And so the proposed proportions are listed in the lower left quadrant. And again, we will use our we will set our recruitment targets to achieve those goals. So now for the meat of the protocol. I mentioned that we're going to be looking at a number of different domains, and one of the things that is really important when we set out to do a study of this magnitude that is going to last for 10 years is to be able to get as much data as we can while making sure that we're not overly burdening the participant population. But there are several different areas that we were very interested in ensuring that we were collecting information on. So one of them is neurocognition. So we will be looking at measures of attention, learning, memory, motivation, impulsivity. In substance use, we're going to be looking at things as broad as parental rules, peer influences, obviously use itself, sensitivity to drugs, and consequences of drug use. I think the largest segment of the protocol is the mental health, health and demography section, where we'll be looking at a number of different factors. Mental health was, of course, a major topic of our interest to us, but we will also be looking at physical activity, puberty, sleep, traumatic brain injury. As I mentioned, there are many institutes that are involved, and each institute has different areas of interest that they're looking in. Several of them are very interested in sports participation, concussions, and traumatic brain injury. We'll also be looking at food insecurity and screen time and other types of extracurricular activities that kids are participating in. With respect to culture and environment, we'll be looking at ethnic identity and acculturation, discrimination, neighborhood safety and school safety, as well as parental monitoring. We will also be collecting biospecimens. So we will be doing breathalyzer and saliva and hair samples on a subset of the kids to confirm recent drug use. We will also be doing a saliva and blood collection for genetic and epigenetic analyses, as well as, if parents are willing to part with them, we will be collecting baby teeth, which are an indicator of environmental exposure and actually allow you to create a timeline of exposure dating back to the second trimester of gestation. We also have a mobile tech and passive data group that have been looking at other ways of collecting data that could be informative but does not increase the burden to participants. So one of the things that we're looking at, for example, is the use of Fitbits for physical activity, heart rate, and sleep monitoring, and we are in the process of doing a validation study of the Fitbits, and depending on the outcome of that validation study, we will roll this out to a subset of the sites, the ABCD sites, to add Fitbit data to the study. We are also hoping to get school records and down the road pediatrician records, as well as doing some geocoding from residential histories to also look at other types of exposures. This group is also very interested, as the cohort matures and time passes and technology evolves, in identifying other data sources that may be helpful and informative. So as the kids, for example, start having their own phones and participating in social media, that is something that we will be exploring down the road in terms of what kind of information it can provide. And then, of course, we will be doing MRI. So we will be doing structural MRI to look at shape, size, and integrity of the brain structures, as well as resting state and task-based functional MRI to look at the functional organization both at rest and while doing a task. So this slide gives you a little bit of an idea of what participants will be experiencing over time. So we'll be beginning when the kids are 9 and 10 years old. At that first visit, the assessment battery will last about 6 to 7 hours. That will include all of the behavioral assessments and interviews, the biospecimen collection, as well as the brain imaging, and that total time also includes the consent process and breaks and all of that. The parents will also be undergoing during those visits some questionnaires, and all of the assessments and the questionnaires are iPad-based, which we think will also help facilitate the assessment process. The families will come in every year. They will only do the brain imaging and the biospecimen collection for genetics and epigenetics every other year. On the off years, they will continue to do the behavioral assessments and the interviews. And then every 3 to 6 months, there will also be phone or web-based interviews that will occur. And then the last point that I really want to stress is we recognize that there's a wide amount of data that will be generated from this study, and we think it's very important to make all of this data available to the scientific community as soon as possible. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there are specific research questions that we were interested in setting forth with this study. However, we recognize that there are many, many, many more research questions that could be answered with the data that will be generated from this study, and so it's really important that the data be made available to the community. So we are really embracing an open science model in which the raw, cleaned, anonymized data will be made available 1 month after data collection, and then annually we will be doing a data release of curated anonymized data. So as well as releasing the computational workflows that were used to produce the data so that they can be readily analyzed. And we hope that this way we don't have to wait 10 years to see the results of this work, that there will be results emerging on a constant basis throughout the course of the study. I think with that, I will turn it over to Kevin for any comments he might have.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Dowling. That was very helpful. Dr. Gray, are you on?
Yes, hello. Hey, thank you all so much for letting me join, and thank you for the comprehensive presentation, Dr. Dowling. Just, really my perspective on this is both representing AAAP and also just representing myself as a physician and scientist. This is a really, really exciting endeavor. It's one of those few things in a research career that one sees that's really, I would describe as a moonshot. One of those really ambitious undertakings, because there's so many things that we speculate about regarding brain development in adolescence and cognitive development, and particularly within what's relevant to my research is substance use. And so many things we see within small studies that are suggestive or that are associations, but that we can't really get at directionality. So in terms of whether there are things that predict substance use behavior or consequences of substance use behavior, and trying to characterize those things, it's very difficult to do even in a carefully constructed longitudinal study. But within this, so many factors are being considered, and it's being done from a very young age, and really the real key to this is a really massive sample size. So it's ambitious by design, and I think it stands to answer a lot of questions, and I think actually one of the more exciting things about this is that with the sample size and with the longitudinal design, it's likely to answer some questions we haven't even thought of yet. So this is one of those prospective data collection opportunities that may address a whole host of public health concerns that are already pressing, but ones that we may anticipate in the future. So, really both as a clinician and as a researcher, but also representing AAAP and thinking about advocacy for adolescents, the good news about this is that this is being very, very carefully designed by Dr. Dowling and colleagues, and is really, it comprises the experts in the field. I think that the challenge of this, of course, is that with a really comprehensive longitudinal design, it's going to take a while to get the answers, and actually that will be an ongoing process. And if we think about some of the international longitudinal cohorts that have been followed for a long period of time that don't have this level of technical detail, is some things that have started in the 60s and 70s we've used to mine in terms of extracting data with development. But this really kind of learned from those studies and then expands upon those methods. And so I'm personally very excited about this, but I think also we collectively ought to be excited about this because so many things we feel we're too limited by our current grant mechanisms or by our current study designs or by single team approach are really going to be eclipsed by this. And so I'm excited about it, and actually I don't want to take too much more time myself because I'm not the expert on this study itself, but more an audience member, and I know that others likely have questions. So I think we're opening it up for questions from here. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Gray. And it sounds to me, before we open it up for questions, that really as an advocacy community and sort of speaking with my ABC hat, American Brain Coalition, the advocacy community can really embrace this by promoting it, supporting it, and we will continue to do that. So I'll make sure that, I sort of remind our members of the importance of this effort. So now I will turn
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and really my thought on this is this is something we ought to be in on together in terms of both that we can contribute by spreading word about it. The nice thing is this covers a number of communities in the country. The recruitment rate is going to be very ambitious, so whatever we can do to drum up interest in this and getting families to volunteer and participate, but also just getting word out about what exciting things will be yielded from the data.
Exactly, exactly. That's why it is so important that we are having webinars like this so that we can be educating, all of the community, and we'll have it available like Justina mentioned. So from
Absolutely.
here, I'm going to turn it over to both of you. I believe, Dr. Dowling, you have some of the questions that have come in that you can start answering for us.
Yeah, and I'll actually segue from what you were both just talking about, and one of the questions was about how advocacy organizations can partner with ABCD to help play a role, and I think you both answered that question very nicely. This study is very ambitious, and it hinges on the participation of kids and parents and families, and I think that the advocacy community has a unique ability to be able to reach those people to help them understand why this is so important. I think those of us that are in this world recognize the value immediately, but not everybody might, and so I think that the advocacy community can really play a very strong role in getting the word out and helping local communities understand the value and the long-term implications of something like this. One of the things that I'm often asked is what is in it for the families, and really it is an altruistic endeavor. This is an observational study. There's no intervention, so it really is about adding to the scientific knowledge base. The kids do get the families are compensated, of course, for their time and participation in the study, but they won't get any direct information on their child's assessments. So understanding the long-term implications of a study like this will go a long way towards encouraging people to participate. Let's see here. There's another question here. Let me see if I can make this bigger. By using the schools, are you leaving out homeschooled kids who may have different experiences and different issues? That's a great question, and it's one that we wrestled with. We will be leaving out, we won't be actively recruiting kids that are being homeschooled because the recruitment strategy is to work through the schools. That said, if kids that are if families that have kids that are being homeschooled find out about the study and contact a research site, and all of that information is on our website, they can be included in the study. Let's see. This is another great question, is why are we starting, why did we pick the ages 9 and 10 and to 19 and 20 for the study? Because we know that brain development continues into the mid-20s. That's another great question, and another one that we really wrestled with. I think that there's a lot of information that we're missing by not getting early childhood development, and by starting with the kids when they're 9 and 10. One of the reasons for that choice was that Substance abuse and mental illness were very important considerations for the study, important research questions. So we wanted to make sure that we started early enough that we could, our first baseline assessment would be before most of the kids had experienced any substance use or any mental illness had emerged, but not so early that it would take many more years for us to get information that could be useful, particularly informative towards policymaking regarding substance use policies. So we're at a time now where those are changing very rapidly, and so the sooner that we can get some information about the impact of substance use or predictors of substance use, the better. So we had to kind of juggle those competing interests between getting early childhood information and then having to wait longer to see what happens in adolescence with getting the information as soon as possible. The question about the other end of the time scale is also equally important. Ideally, we would love to continue this study through the 20s to be able to chart the rest of that brain development process. But at this time, we only have a commitment financially to be able to do the 10 years. Now, my dream is that we will be able to continue the study, but we'll have to see how that happens. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay. Another question that came in is about the exclusion criteria for the study. Will we be including kids with ADHD? Will we be including kids that are on medications? So as I mentioned, we do have some very basic inclusion and exclusion criteria, but our goal is to be as inclusive as possible, so we will definitely be including kids with ADHD. We'll definitely be including kids that are on meds for ADHD and other conditions in the study because they are an important population and it's a very prevalent condition in this country, so that we will be able to answer questions about ADHD and brain development and these other functional outcomes that we will be looking at. Another question is about ensuring that we'll be reaching kids. How will we ensure that we are reaching kids from diverse communities and economic backgrounds? So as I mentioned, we have looked at the demographics of the catchment areas that we will be recruiting from. So most of these are somewhat about within a 50-mile radius of the research sites. But we also have a very specific research design in terms of how we are approaching the schools. So based on the schools that are in those areas, we have information, as I showed, about the demographics of the kids at each of those schools. So our plan is to recruit over a 2-year period and to continuously monitor the demographics of the people that are enrolled in the study. But we will be approaching schools in a stepwise fashion so that as we're monitoring the recruitment, if our demographics are not matching the U.S. population, we can make adjustments to the schools we approach in the next wave to increase representation from certain demographics. So that was another reason that we chose to use the school systems, because it actually allows us to make these adjustments in near real time to ensure that at the end of the 2 years, the demographics of our sample is very representative. And that's critical to this study moving forward. Let's see. What measures will be taken to retain children in the study over this long period of time? So that's another excellent question. That's going to be critical for this study as well. So, and one of the reasons that we have been so focused in the short term in developing the protocol to ensure that while we want to make sure that we collect as much data as possible, like I said, we don't want we can't have the experience be aversive to the kids or they won't come back. So a lot of effort has gone into designing the protocol, particularly at baseline which is the first real interaction that the kids are going to have with the research staff, to be as pleasant as possible. So there are a lot of different strategies that we are employing at the baseline visit to make it more enjoyable. From our piloting, we're currently doing a multi-site pilot of the full protocol before we launch in the fall to see how acceptable it is to the kids, among other things. And in that process, we're learning a lot about what the kids do like and what they don't like, what the parents like and don't like. Because all of the assessments are on iPads and the kids are very familiar, particularly with doing games, and a lot of these assessments feel like games on the iPads, that seems to be pretty acceptable. It's balancing that with the interviews, which are not as much fun. They tend to like the brain imaging because they're also playing games inside the imager, as well as getting to watch movies during certain parts of the protocols. So we're trying to make the experience as positive as we can for the kids. Another way we're doing that is that some of the sites are doing the data collection visits as what they're calling data camps. So they're bringing in multiple kids at once. The kids all do their assessments individually, but there is time for worked in for play to make the experience more enjoyable. But beyond that, we do have to really focus on continued communication with all of the participants. So we will be sending birthday cards and reminders and newsletters about things that are going on in the study to keep them engaged. We hope to have some information up on social media so that we are continuously getting information out there to keep people engaged. But this is another way, as we were talking about previously, that I think that the advocacy community can help. I think keeping, because it is such a long study, keeping awareness of the study and the importance of the study alive throughout the course is going to be really critical. We are putting a lot of effort into thinking about ways that we can continuously raise awareness of the study amongst various communities, which will help engage people. I think we've got T-shirts for the kids that they're going to get to take home, so that, you know, have a brain and a cool slogan on them that they will hopefully wear and spread the word about the study. But anything that can be done to keep ABCD in the consciousness of these communities will be very important towards retention. Let me see, what else do we have here? And then there's another question about the data. Who will be analyzing the data, and how will the results be shared? So as I mentioned, so we have 19 research sites and many, many, many investigators that are part of the consortium that will be participating in data analysis as the study is moving forward. However, like I mentioned, we're going to be making this data available to the scientific community so that anybody can access it and do data analysis on their own. There are many more questions, as Dr. Gray mentioned, there are many more questions that can be answered that that nobody's thought of. And so for that reason, we want to make sure that this data is readily available so that it can be mined and new ideas. We think of this not only as generating data, but generating questions. And we expect that this study will generate many more new research questions that can then be pursued. So from that perspective, we hope that all of the scientific community that is working in any area tangential to this will be interested in analyzing this data. And actually, related to that, and in response to something that Dr. Gray mentioned about international cohorts, another thing that we are really trying to do with this study is make it clear to the scientific community what we're doing. So we haven't built this part of the website out yet, but we will have all of the members of the work groups that have gone into developing the protocol will be listed there. The details of the protocol itself, so all of the assessments that will be included, more specifics about the brain imaging protocol, all of that information will be on our website, and we are sharing that broadly with researchers so that if there are other groups, particularly internationally, that are that either have adolescent cohorts or are planning, and we have heard from some countries that there are people planning to develop adolescent cohorts in other countries, that they can harmonize their protocol with ours so that in the long run, and then share their data so that we have even greater data for the scientific community. So we really see this as kind of a launching pad. A lot of work has gone into developing the protocol. A lot of work has gone into harmonizing just amongst our 19 sites in terms of the imaging protocol on different scanners. So we want the scientific community to benefit from that work, and so all of that information will be out there. And then the other part of that question had to do with when results will be released, and I am hoping that results will be released on an ongoing basis. Obviously, some of the longitudinal analyses will take time for the data to be collected and then analyzed, but there will be information that is going to come out of this study continuously, we hope. And I think, let's see, looks like that's about it in terms of questions. I don't see any others posted here.
Dr. Dowling, I just see one more that just came in.
Okay.
It says, will you be utilizing any of the data that was previously accumulated by the National Children's Study?
That's a good question. So we as ABCD will not, because our goal is really to collect the data and put it out there for analysis. So individual researchers that are doing analysis that may be part of ABCD may use some of that data in their analyses, but in terms of what we're doing, it's to generate additional data. But that does raise another interesting point, which is that the data that we are going to be releasing will be released through the NIH Data Archive, and through the NIH Data Archive, researchers will be able to not only access ABCD data, but access other data sets that are in that are being shared through their system that are related, and they will individually be able to pool that data. So that's another strength about how we're sharing the data, is by using the NDA, people can access and combine our data set with other data sets to be able to strengthen it, as the questioner is indicating. Any others? I'm not seeing any, but I can't open my window.
I don't see any either, Dr. Dowling. So what we can do is, if others do have questions, they can certainly get in touch with me, and I can forward them on to you. So most people on the call have my email address. So if there are other questions that people think of, we can certainly forward them. But I can just tell you that this has been extremely helpful and informative. And having a 9-year-old myself, I just think this is an exciting opportunity. So I'd like to personally thank you, Dr. Dowling, for this update, as well as your commitment to such an important project moving forward. I'd also like to thank Dr. Gray for adding his very important perspective. Also discussing the patient advocacy community and what we can do to get involved. Both of you, I think that's exciting, and we will. The American Brain Coalition will get involved in continually providing updates to our members to encourage them to disseminate it to information to their members, throughout the coming years. So we hope to keep the lines of communication open there. Lastly, I'd like to thank the AAAP for sponsoring this webinar, along with the ABC, especially Justina for your guidance. You've been a huge help. And lastly, I'd thank you all for participating today, and hope that you enjoy your summer. And I think at that, we will exit this webinar.
Yes, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions, Katie, did you want to note what your email address is for everyone? We can send an email.
Why don't I? Yep, no, absolutely, good idea. So my email address is ksale, S as in Sam, A-L-E, @AmericanBrainCoalition.org.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thank you to everyone.
If I could just interrupt, I have the ABCD study website is on that last slide, abcdstudy.org, and my email address can be found on that website as well.
Perfect. Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, and everyone, have a great day.
Thank you all.
Everyone.